But beneath the surface, there was a restlessness he couldn't shake. It gnawed at him in the stillness of the night, a vague but persistent longing for something more, something beyond the endless routine of repairs and solitude. As he sat on the worn steps of his small workshop, staring up at the unfamiliar constellations, Jake couldn't help but wonder if there was more to life than the slow decay of time on this forgotten world. On one such night, as he tinkered with an old generator under the pale light of a waning moon, a strange sensation washed over him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and the air seemed to hum with an electric charge. He paused, tools in hand, his breath catching in his throat as he scanned the darkness for the source of this inexplicable feeling. Then he saw her. Out of the shadows, an alien girl emerged, her steps hesitant yet purposeful. Her appearance was unlike anything Jake had ever seen, ethereal, almost as if she had stepped out of a dream. Her eyes, glowing with an inner light, seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality, and her presence exuded a subtle, almost palpable aura of power. She looked disoriented, desperate even, as if she had been running from something unseen. Jake's heart raced as he stood frozen in place, unable to tear his eyes away from the figure before him. For a moment, time itself seemed to stand still, the world around him fading into the background. The girl took a few unsteady steps toward him, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "I need you," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with a desperation that Jake couldn't ignore. Before he could react, before he could even comprehend what was happening, there was a sudden flash of light, a blinding, brilliant burst that enveloped him completely. The ground vanished beneath his feet, and the familiar world of his colony dissolved into nothingness. Panic surged through him as he felt himself being pulled, stretched across the fabric of space itself. When the light finally subsided, Jake found himself lying on a cold, metallic surface. His vision blurred as he tried to focus on his surroundings, the remnants of the disorienting flash still dancing behind his eyes. As his senses slowly returned, he realized he was no longer on the colony. The air here was different, crisp and sterile, tinged with the faint hum of advanced machinery. He pushed himself up on shaky arms, his mind reeling from the sudden shift in reality. The room he was in was sleek, almost unnervingly so, its walls smooth and reflective, illuminated by soft, pulsing lights that seemed to flow like liquid. The technology was far beyond anything he had ever encountered, a stark contrast to the crude, aging equipment of his home. Jake's confusion quickly turned to alarm as he remembered the girl, the strange, desperate girl who had appeared out of nowhere and spoken those haunting words. He scanned the room, searching for any sign of her, for any explanation of where he was or why he had been taken. But the only sound that reached his ears was the low, rhythmic hum of the ship's engines, steady and unyielding. His breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to make sense of it all. This wasn't a dream, it was too real, too vivid. Fear and confusion battled for dominance in his mind, each thought more frantic than the last. What did she want with him? Where was she taking him? And why, of all people, had she chosen him? But Jake was not one to succumb to panic. He had spent his life fixing broken things, solving problems one step at a time, and he clung to that instinct now. He needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. Forcing himself to his feet, Jake steadied his breathing and called out into the empty air, his voice echoing off the cold, metallic walls. "Where am I? What the hell is going on?" There was no immediate response, only the unyielding hum of the ship around him. But Jake wasn't about to give up. He took a step forward, then another, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar technology, his mind racing to piece together the fragments of information he had. He didn't have long to wait. A door at the far end of the room slid open with a soft hiss, and there she was, Lyra, the alien girl who had dragged him from his quiet life and thrust him into the unknown. She stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of determination and sorrow, as if the weight of the universe itself rested on her shoulders. Jake's pulse quickened as he faced her, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. But the one that escaped his lips was simple, direct, and heavy with the gravity of the situation. "Why me? My name is Lyra," she began, her words deliberate and measured. I come from a race known as the Illyrians. We are an ancient people, born in the earliest days of the universe, when the stars themselves were young. For countless generations, we have lived in the shadows of time, observing, guiding, but never interfering. Our purpose has always been to maintain the balance of reality, to ensure that the cosmos unfolds as it should. Jake listened, his mind reeling as he tried to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. It sounded like something out of a myth, a legend too grand to be real. But there was a sincerity in Lyra's voice, a depth of conviction that made it impossible for him to dismiss her words outright. We Illyrians possess abilities that allow us to see beyond the veil of the present, Lyra continued. We can manipulate the very fabric of time and reality, shaping it to preserve the balance that holds the universe together. For eons, we have been silent observers, ensuring that no single force, no matter how powerful, can disrupt the delicate equilibrium of existence. As she spoke, Lyra's gaze drifted, as if she were recalling memories of a time long past. She described the Illyrians' once great civilization, a society built on knowledge and harmony, where technology had reached heights unimaginable to most other species. They had long transcended the need for conflict or expansion, living instead in a state of cosmic stewardship, their influence subtle yet profound. But that golden age had come to an end. Lyra's voice grew heavy as she explained the tragedy that had befallen her people. A mysterious force had emerged from the darkest corners of the cosmos, something beyond even the Illyrians' understanding or control. It was a force that defied the laws of reality, consuming everything in its path. It was not just a physical threat, but a metaphysical one, something that attacked the very essence of what the Illyrians were. Our powers, once so formidable, have become useless against this force, Lyra confessed, her voice trembling slightly. We have seen countless futures, explored every possibility, but in every scenario, our end is inevitable. We are running out of time. And in our desperation, we search for a way to avert our extinction. Jake could feel the desperation in her words, the fear that laced each syllable. Yet, he found it almost impossible to reconcile her story with the reality he had known all his life. He was just a mechanic, an ordinary man from a remote colony. How could he possibly be connected to the fate of an entire alien race, let alone one as powerful as the Illyrians? You're telling me, Jake said slowly, struggling to keep his voice steady, that you've seen the future? That you've looked through every possible outcome, and somehow, I'm supposed to be the one to save your people? Lyra nodded, her expression solemn. Yes, Jake. You are the key. In every future we have glimpsed, you are the only constant, the only hope we have. I don't fully understand why, but your existence, your very essence, is tied to the survival of my race. That is why I had to find you, why I had to bring you here. Jake shook his head, disbelief still gnawing at him. But I'm just a man, a mechanic, not some kind of hero or savior. How can I be the one to stop something that even your people, with all your power, can't defeat? Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time since she had appeared, she seemed almost vulnerable. I know this is hard to believe, Jake. And I know you must feel overwhelmed. But time is running out. The force that threatens us is growing stronger every moment. If we don't act soon, it will be too late, not just for my people, but for all life in the universe. Jake could hear the sincerity in her plea, the urgency that drove her to seek him out across the vastness of space. Yet doubt still gnawed at him, a deep-rooted skepticism that refused to be easily dismissed. He wanted to help, something in him ached to believe her, to take up the mantle she offered. But he was afraid of the responsibility, of the unknown, of the possibility that he might fail. Lyra seemed to sense his hesitation, and she took a step closer, her voice gentle yet firm. I don't have all the answers, Jake. I wish I did. But I believe in you. I've seen what you're capable of, even if you haven't. You're stronger than you know, and there's something inside you, something that can save us all. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine, a sensation that was equal parts fear and anticipation. He wanted to trust her, to believe that there was more to him than the life he had known. But the uncertainty loomed large, casting a shadow over the path that lay before him. Still, as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he saw something there, a glimmer of hope, a spark of belief that he had never seen in himself. And in that moment, something shifted within him. He didn't know if he was ready to accept the role she had thrust upon him, but he knew that he couldn't turn away, not when so much was at stake. Taking a deep breath, Jake nodded, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. "All right," he said quietly, his voice firm despite the turmoil within him. "I'll do what I can. But you're going to have to help me understand what I'm supposed to do. If I'm really the key, then I need to know everything." She explained that the abilities he would unlock were buried deep within his DNA, remnants of an ancient pact forged between humanity and the Illyrians when humans were a far more advanced civilization. Jake struggled to comprehend this revelation. How could he, an ordinary man from a remote colony, possess such power? It seemed impossible, like trying to grasp at the wind. Yet, the gravity in Lyra's voice left no room for doubt. His first attempts to access these abilities were met with frustration. Lyra guided him through meditation exercises, focusing his mind on the flow of time and the fabric of reality itself. But no matter how hard he tried, Jake could feel nothing out of the ordinary. His mind remained stubbornly earthbound, his thoughts tangled in the mundane concerns of his old life. He grew more frustrated with each passing day. The harder he tried, the more elusive the powers seemed to become. He could feel doubt creeping in, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. What if he wasn't the key, after all? What if Lyra had made a mistake? These thoughts clouded his mind, making it even harder to focus. Lyra, sensing his growing despair, tried to reassure him. "It's not something you can force, Jake," she said gently. "These abilities are a part of you, but they've been dormant for so long. You have to let them come to the surface naturally, like a memory you've forgotten but that's always been there." Jake nodded, but the words did little to ease his frustration. He was a man of action, someone who had always relied on his hands and his mind to solve problems. This was something else entirely, something beyond his understanding. And the more he struggled to reach for it, the further away it seemed to slip. Then, one night, as he lay in the small, dimly lit quarters of the starship, Jake was suddenly overwhelmed by a vision. It was as if the fabric of reality had torn open, revealing a scene from a time long past. He saw himself, or rather, an ancestor of his, standing among a group of Illyrians. They were gathered around a large, glowing artifact, its surface shimmering with a light that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the universe. The Illyrians spoke in a language Jake couldn't understand, but somehow, he knew what they were saying. They were talking about a pact, a bond that would link their two races forever. The artifact was a conduit, a way to share the Illyrians' power with humanity, to ensure that they would always have the ability to protect the balance of the cosmos. As the vision faded, Jake was left with a sense of awe and dread. The weight of his heritage, the responsibility that had been passed down through countless generations, settled heavily on his shoulders. He realized now that the abilities Lyra spoke of were not just a gift, they were a duty, one that he had no choice but to accept. The next day, as the starship navigated through a particularly treacherous region of space, that sense of duty was put to the test. The ship's systems began to falter, the controls unresponsive as they were pulled toward a massive gravitational anomaly. Alarms blared, and Jake could see the panic in Lyra's eyes as she struggled to regain control. In that moment, something inside Jake shifted. The fear and frustration that had been building within him transformed into a fierce determination. He wasn't going to let this be the end. He wasn't going to fail, not now, not when so much was at stake. He closed his eyes and reached deep within himself, past the doubt and the fear, to the place where that ancient power lay dormant. He could feel it now, a faint pulse that echoed the rhythm of the artifact he had seen in his vision. Focusing on that pulse, he let it guide him, let it rise to the surface. The sensation was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was as if the entire universe had suddenly come into focus, each star, each particle of matter, a thread in a vast, intricate tapestry. He could see the flow of time, the currents of reality, all converging on this moment. With a surge of willpower, Jake extended his consciousness outward, wrapping it around the ship and pulling it back from the brink. The gravitational anomaly resisted, but Jake pushed harder, drawing on the full extent of his newfound power. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the ship began to stabilize, the alarms quieting as the anomaly released its grip. When he opened his eyes, Jake was met with the sight of Lyra staring at him in astonishment. She didn't need to say anything. The look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. He had done it. He had tapped into the power that had lain dormant within him for so long. The realization filled him with a sense of accomplishment he had never known. It wasn't just the success itself, but what it represented, the unlocking of a potential that had been hidden for generations. He could feel the connection to his ancestors, to the Illyrians, to the universe itself, and it was both humbling and exhilarating. Lyra stepped forward, her expression softening into one of relief and admiration. "You did it, Jake," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "You've taken the first step. There's so much more for you to learn, but I have no doubt that you're capable of it. You're stronger than you realize." Jake nodded, a new sense of determination settling within him. The journey ahead would not be easy, he knew that now. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it. With Lyra by his side guiding him, he would learn to harness the full extent of his power. And when the time came, he would use it to save her people, just as she had believed he could. The doubts and fears that had plagued him before had not vanished, but they no longer held him back. He had taken the first step, and with it, a new path had opened before him. There was no turning back now. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and together, they would prevail. The journey through the uncharted void had been harrowing, but nothing could have prepared Jake for what awaited them at the heart of the cosmic disturbance. As the starship approached the epicenter, the very fabric of space seemed to unravel before his eyes. Stars twisted and distorted, their light bending in unnatural ways. Planets flickered in and out of existence, their shapes warping as if reality itself were struggling to maintain its coherence. The sheer chaos of it all was disorienting, a maelstrom of cosmic energy that defied the laws of physics. Jake could feel the pressure in his mind, the sensation of something vast and unknowable pressing against the edges of his consciousness. It was as if the universe was crying out in pain, its very essence being torn apart by the force that lay at the center of this disturbance. He gripped the edges of his seat, his knuckles white, as he tried to steady himself against the overwhelming disorientation. But there was something else, too, something familiar lurking beneath the surface of the chaos. It was a sensation he couldn't quite place, a distant echo that tugged at the corners of his mind. As they moved closer to the source, the feeling grew stronger, more insistent, until it became impossible to ignore. Lyra's expression was one of grim determination, but there was also a shadow of fear in her eyes. She had been driven by desperation, by the need to save her people, but now, as they neared the end of their journey, that fear had begun to surface. Jake could see it in the way her hands trembled ever so slightly, in the tightness of her jaw as she tried to maintain control. As they delved deeper into the disturbance, the chaotic energy surrounding them seemed to intensify. The starship's sensors flickered erratically, unable to make sense of the data being fed to them. But Jake's focus had shifted from the external chaos to something far more profound, the realization that the force they were confronting was not an enemy from without, but a shadow from within. It hit him like a revelation, a sudden clarity that cut through the confusion. This wasn't just some malevolent cosmic entity. It was a part of Lyra, a fragment of her consciousness that had somehow broken free and grown into something far more powerful and dangerous than either of them could have imagined. "Lyra," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. This thing we're facing, it's not what we thought. It's you." Lyra turned to him, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "It's a part of you," Jake continued, the words coming faster now as the pieces began to fall into place. "In your desperation to save your people, you must have created this parallel dimension within your mind. It's grown, fed by your fear, your determination. And now, it's threatening to tear everything apart. The truth of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Lyra's expression shifted from shock to a dawning horror as she realized the implications of what Jake was saying. This force, this fragment of herself, had become a sentient entity, one that was capable of consuming both realities if left unchecked. But how? Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. How could I have done this? Jake reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You were trying to protect your people, to find a way to save them at any cost. But in doing so, you created something that you can't control. Now we have to stop it before it's too late. Lyra's gaze dropped to the floor, her thoughts clearly racing as she grappled with the enormity of the situation. The idea of confronting this part of herself, this fragment that had grown into something monstrous, was terrifying. And the solution Jake proposed, merging with it, risking her life to restore balance, was almost too much to bear. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice barely audible. If I merge with it, I could lose myself completely. I could become that thing. Jake's heart ached at the sight of her fear, at the thought of losing the connection they had forged. He had come to care for her deeply, more than he ever thought possible, and the idea of her sacrificing herself was unbearable. But he also knew that they had no other choice. The fate of her people, of both their worlds, depended on her. You're stronger than you think, Lyra, Jake said softly, his voice filled with conviction. You've already done the impossible by bringing us here. You can do this. I'll be with you every step of the way. You're not alone. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes searching his for reassurance. There was a flicker of resolve in her gaze, a spark of the strength that Jake had seen in her from the very beginning. She nodded slowly, as if convincing herself as much as him. All right, she said finally, her voice steadying. We do this together. With a deep breath, Lyra began to focus inward, reaching out to the fragment of herself that had caused so much destruction. The ship around them shuddered as the cosmic forces grew more volatile, but Jake remained by her side, lending her his strength and his unwavering support. As Lyra connected with the fragment, the two realities, hers and the one within the disturbance, began to converge. The chaotic energy intensified, the walls of the starship bending and warping as the two dimensions collided. But through it all, Jake could feel the bond between them strengthening, becoming something unbreakable. The process was agonizingly slow, every moment fraught with tension as Lyra fought to merge with the fragment without losing herself in the process. But with Jake's support, she held on, her willpower and determination guiding her through the darkness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chaotic energy began to subside. The distortion in space around them lessened, the stars and planets gradually returning to their natural state. The two realities, once at odds, began to align, the balance restored. When it was over, Lyra opened her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at Jake, a mixture of relief and exhaustion in her gaze. We did it, she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. It's over. Jake smiled, a wave of emotion washing over him as he pulled her into a tight embrace. They had faced the impossible together and emerged victorious. The bond between them, forged in the fires of crisis, was stronger than ever. In the heart of the cosmic disturbance, with the universe itself seeming to teeter on the brink of collapse, Lyra knew what she had to do. The fear that had gripped her, the uncertainty that had held her back, now gave way to a deep, unshakable resolve. Jake's presence beside her was a lifeline, a beacon of strength that anchored her in the storm of chaos swirling around them. His unwavering support had given her the courage to face the truth, that the only way to save her people, to restore balance to the cosmos, was to merge with the fragmented part of herself that had caused so much destruction. Jake could see the determination in her eyes, and though the thought of what she was about to do filled him with dread, he knew there was no other choice. He reached out, taking her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. You're not alone, Lyra. I'm with you, every step of the way. With a deep breath, Lyra closed her eyes and began the process of merging with the fragment. The world around them seemed to dissolve, the boundaries of reality blurring as their surroundings faded into a kaleidoscope of shifting colors and shapes. The starship, the stars, the very fabric of space itself, all became abstract, fluid, as if they were caught in the flow of a cosmic river, their forms bending and twisting with the current. Lyra's consciousness expanded, reaching out to the fragment that had grown into a force of its own. It was a part of her, yet it was alien, a being born from her deepest fears and her most desperate desires. The moment of contact was electrifying, a surge of energy that pulsed through her, resonating with a power that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The fragment resisted, its sentience clinging to the autonomy it had gained, but Lyra held firm, guided by the strength she drew from Jake. The process of merging was not a simple act of will. It was a confrontation of self, a reconciliation of the light and the darkness within her. The abstract imagery that surrounded them, swirling galaxies, fractal patterns of light and shadow, the ebb and flow of cosmic energies, mirrored the internal struggle taking place within Lyra's mind. Each moment felt like an eternity, the tension almost unbearable as she fought to bring the two halves of her being back into harmony. Jake watched in awe, his own consciousness expanding as he remained connected to Lyra, sharing in her journey. He could feel the enormity of what she was attempting, the sheer willpower required to bring balance to the warring forces within her. And as he lent her his strength, he found himself changing as well, his mind opening to the vastness of the universe, his senses attuning to the intricate web of energy that connected all things. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the resistance began to wane. The fragment, once so fierce and independent, began to yield, its energy merging with Lyra's, the two becoming one. The abstract imagery around them intensified, colors and shapes converging into a brilliant, blinding light as the final merge took place. And then, in an instant, the light receded, and they were no longer bound by the constraints of physical form. Jake and Lyra had transcended, their consciousnesses intertwined, their beings transformed into entities of pure energy. They existed now in a state beyond time and space, a place where the very fabric of reality was malleable, where thought and will shaped the universe itself. In this transcendent state, they could see the cosmic forces that had been in turmoil, the delicate balance that had been so close to collapsing. Together, they reached out, their combined consciousnesses weaving the threads of reality back into harmony, ensuring that no single force could dominate or disrupt the balance that held the universe together. Their actions resonated throughout the cosmos, a wave of stability that spread from the heart of the disturbance to the furthest reaches of space. As the cosmic energies settled, Jake and Lyra found themselves in a state of calm, a serene stillness that belied the magnitude of what they had just achieved. They had become more than they ever thought possible, guardians of the universe's balance, beings whose very existence was now tied to the harmony of all that is. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, forged in the fires of conflict and tempered by their shared resolve. In this new form, they watched over the universe, their awareness spanning galaxies, their presence felt in the subtle shifts of cosmic energy. They were no longer bound by the limitations of flesh and bone, but had become part of the very fabric of reality itself, custodians of a balance that would endure for all time. Reflecting on their journey, Jake and Lyra felt a profound sense of peace. The path they had walked, fraught with danger and uncertainty, had led them to a place of understanding, a realization that their destinies had always been intertwined. The bond they shared was something that transcended the boundaries of species, of time, of existence itself. It was a connection born of shared purpose and mutual trust, one that would guide them in their eternal role as guardians. As they gazed out into the vastness of space, they knew that their journey was far from over. The universe was ever-changing, a place of infinite possibilities and endless challenges. But they were ready, together, to face whatever lay ahead. The stars stretched out before them, a tapestry of light and darkness, of creation and destruction, of life and death. And in that vast expanse, they saw not just the echoes of the past, but the promise of a future they would help shape.